In the recent Q&A session, many people asked me about how to find out whether to rent or buy a property. In this video, I will try to answer or share my 2 cents on the rent versus buy topic. There are many calculators out there which one can use to find whether it makes sense to rent or buy. However, I want to discuss with you the mindset one should have in different scenarios and also understand the thought process behind the rent versus buy calculators in this video. Mindset is very important and it decides whether the property you are buying is an investment or not. So I have divided it into 3 different scenarios. First scenario is you have decided to buy a property but are confused on whether to live in it or rent it out. Second scenario is you want to live in your own house and not in a rented property. Third and the last scenario is you want to buy a house to rent it out. In all 3 scenarios, different mindset comes into play. In first scenario, it would make sense to use the calculators which we will see later in the video. However, here is a quick math that you can do to know whether it is beneficial to rent the property to someone else or live in it yourself. So let's assume that you are living in a 3-room apartment and paying $700 as rent. Now, if you buy a similar apartment, just check how much rent you can earn if you rent it to someone else. Is it more than what you are paying? Or is it less than what you are paying currently? If the rent you can get is more than the rent you are paying currently, then I will not live in that apartment myself. However, I will rent it out. So for example, if I can get $1,000 after renting the purchased property, then if I am living in it myself, I am not saving $700. However, I am losing $300. Some of you might be thinking, how can I get a rent more than what I am paying from a similar property? Well, it could happen because of any number of reasons. One of them is the apartment you are currently living in, you rented it, let's say 3 years ago, and at that time the rents were lower. However, now the rents have increased. Another way you can earn more rent is to make it a shared apartment. That is renting each room to different people instead of renting the whole apartment to a single person. Well, this is just an example. Please note, I have not talked about cash flow here. It is just some dirty way to get a rough idea about what makes more sense, that is renting or buying. This is how I think if I am in the first scenario and I am confused whether to rent it to someone else or live myself in this property. Second scenario is you are fed up of living on rent and want to move into your own house. This decision of living in your own house might be triggered by a number of different factors, but important here is that you want to live in your own house. In this scenario, that house is my primary residence and not an investment for me. It is very important to understand why I think your primary residence is not an investment. Well, just ask yourself this question. Will you sell your house after 5 years if the property price doubled? Or will you sell it if the price just crashed? I think and hope that you will not. When one buys a property for themselves, there are a lot of emotions attached to that house. It is not any property that you will just sell because of market movements. I mean, it is your home. So when one buys his or her home, factors other than how much the real estate market will grow in future takes higher priority. You would prefer your house to be suitable for your kids and your family needs. It's good if your needs and the location with potential growth are same. However, property appreciation is at least not my primary concern when I am buying my primary residence. Therefore, I do not think of it as an investment and focus on my family needs while buying a house for myself. Of course, before I buy a house to live in it myself, I still need to check whether living on rent is more beneficial than buying or not. But I wanted to stress on the mindset that it is not an investment decision for me. And here is a quick and dirty way to do it. If you want to move out of your current house because of any reason and the rent of your new apartment or house is higher or equal to your approximate monthly installment, then start digging deeper into rent versus buy calculators. Now, the last scenario is you want to rent the house to someone else if you buy one. In this scenario, I am an investor and I will choose a property accordingly. I will consider which area and type of property will see the most growth, who are my target tenants, how much rent I can get, and all other research goes into it. Well, now we have discussed the mindset one should have in different scenarios. There might be other scenarios and you might be confused what to do. Well, first click that like button and then mention that scenario in the comments down below. I will try to address them to the best of my abilities. Now let's check these calculators and understand how to use them. Everyone has a different situation, so adapt this calculator as per your situation. I have created my own calculator here. You can also create one in Excel. It's pretty simple. Goal here is to understand the calculator itself, and then we will dive into the rent versus buy calculations. I want to say it again here. Please do not confuse this calculator or calculations with rental yield or cash flow calculations. As you can see here, this is the rent I will pay if I live on rent, or the rent I will save if I buy my own house and live in it. In this example, I have assumed it to be 1000. Next, I have taken annual rent increase to be 1%. You can adjust it based on your country or region. Here in Germany, increasing rent is not so easy, so we are good with 1%. With this, we will have the total rent we paid or saved in 10, 20 or 30 years. We are not concerned about tax on rent here, as we are either paying rent to our landlord or saving rent if we live in our own property. So there is no rental income and hence no tax. Next, we have our purchase price and the annual appreciation we think we can get on our property. I have taken house appreciation as 3% here. Again, you can adjust it based on your country or city. House appreciation is one of the most important factors that will determine whether buying is more beneficial than renting or not. So let us spend 1 minute to understand why. When you buy a property, your own investment is some percentage of the purchase price. It can be 10%, 15% or 30%. Rest is not coming out of your own pocket. So when we say 3% or 5% annual growth, that annual growth is on the purchase price and not the amount you invested from your own pocket. So you are using a leverage here. For example, you invested $10,000 of your own money to buy an apartment worth $100,000 and you get an annual return of 3 or 5%. That means you get a return of 3,000 to 5,000. However, your investment was 10,000 only. So return on your investment is around 30 to 50% instead of 3 to 5%. So this is what leveraging is and is one of the many factors that makes investing in real estate worth the effort. Well, coming back, here we have projected the future value of our house based on the assumed annual growth. Next is the buying cost. This includes the cost of notary, land transfer tax, broker, etc. It varies from 10 to 12% of the purchase price in Germany. I took it 10% in this example. Then comes the mortgage interest, which is historically lowest, and the monthly mortgage installment. Mortgage installment is another important factor in this calculation. And if you are in Germany, then you got lucky, which we will also see in few seconds. So mortgage installment is your fixed monthly expense, and normally you do not have any control on how much your monthly installment will be. It is usually based on your mortgage term. However, in Germany, one can adjust his or her mortgage installment. So one can reduce or increase it to a limit based on his or her profile. You must be wondering how adjusting this amount makes me lucky or benefits me. Well, if your monthly installment is way more than the rent you will pay, then it will greatly affect the buy versus rent balance. And more this mortgage installment is, more the balance will favor renting over buying. Don't worry, we will see it later in the video how. So try to have your mortgage installment as low as possible. Next expenses are Hausgeld or homeowner association fee, ancillary cost, maintenance and property tax. Now based on these values, I can see the increase in my monthly expense if I live in my own house instead of living on rent. So how I calculated this increase in expense? This increase in expense is the rent I will save minus all other monthly expenses of owning a house. This is why I said lower your mortgage installment is, lower your increase in monthly expense will be. So if you were renting a place, you didn't have these expenses and can use this amount to invest elsewhere. Now invest elsewhere is the key here. For this calculation, I'm assuming that you will invest this amount and will get an annual return of about 8%. If you think you will not invest that amount anywhere, then make this feel 0%. If you think that you will invest, however, will receive more or less return, then adjust the value accordingly. Personally, I have seen very few people who are so disciplined to invest in an amount consistently for years. Anyways, if you invest this extra amount every month and the initial buying cost in some other investment instrument and expect an annual return of 8%, then you can see how your money will grow over time. I have taken it as lost gains, as if we buy a house, then we would not be able to invest this amount and hence lost these potential gains. Again, This amount affects our buy versus rent decision majorly. If this amount is low, then it will be more profitable to buy a house than renting one. On the other hand, if this amount is high, it will make renting more attractive. Therefore, your increase in monthly expense and the return from other investments are really important factors. Next is the inflation, which I have taken 2% here and will be used to adjust the maintenance cost over time. So here are the expenses that will occur over a time period of 10, 20 and 30 years. The total mortgage interest, maintenance and property tax. I have calculated the interest paid using Interhip calculator. I will mention its link in the description. Now I can calculate my total buying cost. So the total buying cost is the sum of gains I lost, mortgage interest paid to the bank, property tax, maintenance expenses over time, and finally the purchase price. So if you see here, this is my total buying cost over 10, 20 and 30 years. Well, this is the calculator and the different costs we need to consider. Now comes the decision making, whether to buy or rent a house. For that, let's check the profit of owning a house and profit if we have rented a house. So profit of owning a house is the future value of the house plus rent we saved minus total buying cost. Here we can see if we buy and sell a house in 10 years, we might profit approximately 39,000. In 20 years, it reduces to 17,000 and in 30 years, we are in loss. This is majorly contributed by the lost gains, which is why I mentioned earlier this is the one of the major factors. Now let's see the profit if we rented a house. This is the gains that you will get if you invest the initial investment and the amount equivalent to the extra expense every month, minus the rent that we paid while living in a rented property. So you can see here the profit over time, which is increasing exponentially thanks to compounding. So in this scenario, theoretically, renting is better than buying. This outcome is majorly based on that you will invest consistently this amount for 10 to 30 years and will get on average 8% of annual return. So you need to be honest with yourself here in deciding whether you will invest that amount or not. Well, let's play with these numbers a bit to simulate different scenarios. If I keep everything same and only reduce the saving rate, then buying is more beneficial than renting at least till 20 years. Similarly, if I increase the real estate appreciation, then also buying is more beneficial. However, if I increase my saving rate, then renting is more beneficial. Well, I can do it all day long. However, my goal here is to explain you the thought process behind the calculators out there. This way, you can judge better which numbers make sense to you more. For example, if you are someone who cannot commit to invest a monthly amount in stocks consistently, then put the saving rate to 0 and see what happens. Similarly, if you are someone who thinks he or she can get 10% annual return on some other investment consistently, then use that as saving rate. This calculator is just to give you an idea. However, only you know yourself and your needs best, so decide accordingly.